Hello and welcome back, Lady Joyful here with a video for Sasayaki Glitter, and for this video I am using the Mia in the Garden digi stamp, and I am going to be showing you a little bit about how to match your pattern paper colours when choosing the colours for your images. As usual with my digi stamp colouring, I'm going to start by colouring in the skin. That's how I most often do my colouring. I find skin and hair can be tricky parts to do, so it's good to start with those, because then if you really do go wrong and have to start over, I try not to start over where possible. I prefer to try and fix things, but in case you do have to start over, at least you haven't spent ages colouring the rest of the image if you started with the hair and skin first. So a lot of my skin tone colouring I tend to do pale Caucasian skin tones, partly because that's what I'm most familiar with, being that colour myself, and partly because the pens I had were just better for those kinds of skin tones. I didn't have many dark browns, but I recently bought some new Spectrum Noir markers. I have the Illustrator markers, and I got all the 6 packs that are available. I believe there's currently 4 10 packs and 6 packs, and they all have different markers from each other. So originally I had the 4 12 packs, and I've now picked up the 6 packs as well. Basically now I have these other browns that I can use for my skin tones, so I'm experimenting a bit with dark skin colours, partly because I think it's good to represent a variety of colours and races in colouring. Anyway, so as always I begin with laying down my lightest colour, my lightest skin tone, and you can see the caps on screen for all the colours that I'm using. I start with my lightest, I lay in my darkest colour into the shadow areas, and the darkest colour I used was very dark, so I only used just tiny amounts of it, and then I move back through from darkest to lightest after having done that initial layer of lightest colour. This way of colouring skin tone I learnt at the St. Clouder colouring classes. I haven't done many of the colouring classes, but I would like to do some more of them. That's where I picked it up, and I also learnt a lot of my colouring from watching colouring videos like the ones I am now making on YouTube. I hope you find these as helpful as I have found the ones I have watched. And you can of course add detail into the images as you're colouring. You could add in facial features. The image of course doesn't have a nose and mouth drawn in, so you could add those in with your colouring. I'm not confident in doing that, so I didn't do that, but I did add some definition in her chest area because that's quite easy. You just need to add a little line in the centre. Having completed colouring her skin, I'm going to move on to her hair, and I'm going with dark browns again. And I'm making sure to use different shades, different colour tones of the brown to do her hair, because I want to make sure it doesn't look the same as her skin. Here I start with my darkest colour and lay into all the shadow areas and also flick out from all the ends, trying to go with the curve of the way the hair is drawn. And again, this I learnt from Kids and Clouder classes. So I work from darkest to lightest and bring my flicks further and further into the white area as I go. I'm using 4 shades of brown for my hair this time, and once I'd got all the way through the first time I felt like my light areas were too light and I'd lost my shadow areas a bit, so I went back through the whole colour combination, again from darkest to lightest, but this time I brought my darkest colours across more. As you can see, my darkest and second darkest colour actually end up picking up most of her hair, and then just a touch of the next lighter colours. So here you can see the pattern paper I picked out, and I will just quickly show you how I am comparing it to my colour chart and looking at which colours seem to be closest to the colours in the pattern paper. And I decided to pick out the kind of dull greeny blue of the butterflies as well as the pink butterflies, and I also will later pick up on the gold butterflies. So I'm using the kind of greeny blue and the pink for colouring the rest of my image. I'm using the blue tones for her dress, and again I'm laying in my darkest shadowy areas first and putting these, concentrating on the fold of the dress, as well as on the left hand side, because that's where my shadows generally tend to fall based on how I do my light source in my colouring, and I have discussed that before in other videos. And where you lay the shadows in the folds will depend. You can kind of see that based on how the image is drawn. I also did put in some shading under her bust line. Having put in my first 2 shades, I'm using 3 shades here. I'm going in with my lighter shade and finding it a bit tricky to blend out. There's a bit of a step between my lightest and my next lightest, so I started doing some tip to tip with my lightest and my mid-tone, just to make it a bit easier to blend between the two. And if you want to darken up the shading, you could go back and put in another layer of the darkest colours just to really deepen those folds. So now I'm using the pink tones for the band on the top of her dress, her shoes, and the ribbon in her hair. I'm actually only using 2 shades here, but these are all quite small areas, so it seemed to work well enough. And again, I'm putting all my shadows towards the left hand side, and I will try and pay attention to where the folds and curves in the ribbon are and how that would affect the shading. And do remember the supplies I have used will be linked down below, so you will be able to see where to find the image. The shop page does also have some other examples of cards made with this image, so be sure to check that out to see what other people have done with it for more inspiration. I also decided to use my pinks and my greeny shades to colour the butterflies, just to help tie them in with the rest of the card. Now I'm going to move on to the grounding of my image. There's these little stones, so I coloured those with a very light grey, and then I'm using just a very light green for the grassy area. I kept this very simple and just quite flat colouring because the focus is really on Mia, not the ground, not the background. So I'm using my ruler to make sure my grass area is straight, and then I realised I didn't do it far enough back because of course her back hand is resting on the ground, so there needs to be some colouring of the ground up there. So I just moved my ruler up and filled out the rest of that, and then we'll just colour over all of the grassy area down from the line I drew all the way to the bottom of the grass, to the bottom of the oval. And I will kind of go back over it a couple of times just to deepen it out. Then I brought in a different shade of green to lay in my shadows, and this YG one, this khaki colour, works really well against the colour I'd used in the background for laying in shadows. I wasn't happy with the shadow on the right hand side of her dress and under her hand, and I could not work out why. And I realised whilst editing the video that the reason why I'm not happy with it is because the shadow is going the wrong direction, and that's why it doesn't look right to me. Here is where I brought in the gold. I didn't like the way the oval looked directly against the pattern paper, so I'm using my Ranger Emboss It pen, and again this will be linked down below in the description box, and I'm using it to draw all around the edge of the oval. The embossing powder I'm using is a fine detail embossing powder. It doesn't really need to be, but this is a fine detail gold embossing powder called Golden Crown. I think it was Golden Crown, something like that, which I got from a card kit recently. Then I'm going to adhere my pattern paper panel to a card base. I'm just using double-sided tape for this, and I'm using my Misty to help make sure I get it lined up right in the corner so that it's completely flush on the card base. Then I use some liquid glue on the back of my image panel, and I'm going to press that into position on the pattern paper, and that completes my card. If you liked this video, please do give it a thumbs up, and you can subscribe both to my channel and to the Sasayaki Glitter YouTube channel by clicking the buttons that are on screen. There are some more videos here that you may be interested in, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments or over on social media. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!